You've heard their names: Bundy, Gacy, Ramirez. Stories that echo through documentaries, headlines, and nightmares. But most people only know the surface. Beneath the names are deeper horrors, forgotten cases, obscure killers, and crimes that defy logic. This is where we start. The top of the iceberg. Welcome to Black Tapes. The tip. Ted Bundy. A name that's become almost synonymous with the phrase serial killer. To the public eye, he was handsome, intelligent, and charismatic. A law student, a boyfriend, a volunteer at a suicide prevention hotline. But behind the charm was something far darker. Something that, for years, managed to slip through the cracks of society. Bundy began his killings in the early 1970s, though some speculate it may have started as early as 1969. His victims were primarily young women, often with long dark hair parted in the middle. They shared an eerie resemblance to his ex-girlfriend. He would approach them in public, pretending to need help, with a broken arm, dropped books, or loading something into his car. Once he gained their trust, he would knock them unconscious, restrain them, and drive off. What followed was sadistic. Bundy raped and murdered his victims, often returning to the crime scenes to perform further acts with the corpses, sometimes days later. He admitted to decapitating at least 12 of them, keeping the heads as trophies. The true number of victims is still unknown. Officially, he confessed to 30. Unofficially, it may be more than 100. Bundy's crimes stretched across 7 states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, California, and Florida. He escaped custody not once, but twice. During one of his escapes, he made his way to Florida, where he committed one of his most brutal attacks, the Chi Omega sorority murders. In the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega house at Florida State University and bludgeoned 4 women while they slept. 2 of them, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, died from their injuries. Just weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. That would be his final known victim. Bundy was eventually captured, tried, and sentenced to death. His trial was one of the first to be nationally televised, and despite the horrific charges, he received letters from adoring fans. Some even considered him a heartthrob. In an unusual twist, Bundy acted as his own attorney in court, using the trial as a stage to feed his ego. He cross-examined witnesses, smiled for the cameras, and even proposed to a woman in the courtroom. On January 24, 1989, after over a decade on death row, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Outside the prison, crowds gathered. Some cheered, some drank beer, some wore shirts that said, "Burn Bundy, burn." It was a rare moment when justice felt cathartic. And yet, the image of Ted Bundy, smiling, charming, deceiving, remains one of the most haunting portraits of evil in American history. After Ted Bundy's calculated charm and well-dressed deception, it's tempting to think we've already met the worst. But then comes Richard Ramirez. Where Bundy seduced, Ramirez invaded. Where Bundy hid his madness, Ramirez flaunted his. Ramirez didn't pretend to be normal. He didn't need to trick you. He'd break down your door and drag the nightmare in with him. The Night Stalker. Born in 1960 in El Paso, Texas, Richard Ramirez grew up with violence in every direction. His father was aggressive and volatile. His cousin Miguel, a Vietnam War veteran, exposed him to photos of torture and rape from the battlefield. Miguel even shot and killed his own wife in front of Richard. That wasn't the beginning of the nightmare, but it might have been the first crack in the glass. By 1984, Ramirez was prowling the streets of California. He didn't target a specific type. His victims ranged in age, race, gender. He entered homes through open windows. No pattern, no predictability, just fear. He beat, raped, shot, stabbed. He left pentagrams on walls. He whispered, "Hail Satan," to terrified survivors. And the city began to panic. March 17, 1985, Rosemead, California. 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was pulling into her garage when Ramirez approached. He pointed a gun at her. She raised her hands instinctively. The bullet struck her keys and ricocheted. Maria fell, played dead, and survived. Inside the house, her roommate Dale Okazaki wasn't as lucky. Ramirez entered, waited. When she looked up from behind the kitchen counter, he shot her in the forehead. That night, he struck again. One night, multiple attacks. No pattern. The press called him the Night Stalker. Survivors described a tall, skinny man with foul breath, rotting teeth, and eyes full of something inhuman. In court, he carved a pentagram into his hand. He smiled. "Hail Satan," he said, like it was a punchline. Police eventually identified him. His mugshot was released, but it wasn't them who caught him. On August 31st, 1985, a group of citizens in East LA saw him trying to steal a car. They chased him, they beat him, they held him down until police arrived. The devil had lost his shadow. Ramirez was charged with 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to death, but he would never be executed. Richard Ramirez died of cancer in 2013, after 23 years on death row. His crimes were random, senseless, not for love, not for revenge, just destruction. He didn't want to be understood. He wanted to be feared. If Ted Bundy was charm and Richard Ramirez was chaos, then John Wayne Gacy was something far more terrifying. He was normal. On the surface, he was a respected businessman, a local political volunteer, a man who made kids laugh while dressed as a clown. But behind the smile was one of the most prolific and sadistic serial killers in American history. Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago. His childhood was marked by abuse, a strict Catholic upbringing, and an alcoholic, violent father who told him he would never be a real man. As a teenager, Gacy struggled with his sexuality and identity, and by his early 20s, he was already manipulating young men. His charm came with darkness. He was married twice, had stepchildren, and even opened his own construction business called PDM Contractors, short for painting, decorating, and maintenance. Most of his victims came from this business. He hired teenage boys and young men who were runaways, students, or in need of money. They never came back. Gacy loved to perform. He created a clown persona called Pogo, complete with red paint, face makeup, and oversized shoes. He visited children's hospitals, performed at community events, and claimed it helped him bring joy to others. But at night, the clown became something else. Gacy had a routine. He would lure young men to his house, sometimes under the pretense of a job, sometimes by offering drugs or alcohol. Once inside, he'd ask if they wanted to see a magic trick. He'd take out a pair of handcuffs and demonstrate how he could escape from them. Then, he'd challenge the boys to try it themselves. Once they were restrained, the mask dropped. He would assault, torture, and eventually strangle them, often using a piece of cloth twisted with a stick. Gacy called this method the rope trick. He buried 29 bodies in the crawl space beneath his home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, just outside of Chicago. He arranged them in layers, used lime to manage the smell, and when the crawl space filled up, he threw others into the nearby river. Neighbors sometimes complained of a horrible stench coming from his house. Gacy would always reply with the same excuse: "It's just the plumbing." Everything began to unravel on December 11th, 1978. Robert Peist, a 15-year-old boy working at a local pharmacy, told his mother he was going to speak with a man about a job. That man was John Wayne Gacy. Robert never came home. His disappearance was unusual. He was a responsible kid, not a runaway. His mother immediately reported him missing. Detectives looked into the man Robert met with and learned that Gacy had a criminal record from Iowa. In 1968, he had been convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy and served only 18 months. That raised red flags. A search warrant was issued. Inside Gacy's house, police found driver's licenses, handcuffs, clothing that didn't belong to him, and a trap door to the crawl space. What they uncovered beneath the floor: bodies. Dozens of them, stacked, twisted, left to rot for years. Gacy eventually confessed, "There are 29 bodies under my house." The media exploded. He became known as the Killer Clown. During his trial in 1980, Gacy painted pictures of clowns and sold them for profit. He claimed he had a split personality and that Bad Jack was the one responsible for the murders. The jury didn't buy it. He was found guilty of 33 murders and sentenced to death. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, giving interviews, drawing clowns, and insisting he was innocent. On May 10, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection. His final words? "Kiss my ass." Gacy's home was eventually demolished. The land stood empty for years. No one wanted to live there. A new house now stands on the lot, but the address was changed. The past, it seems, was too heavy for 8213 West Summerdale. John Wayne Gacy wasn't a monster in the dark. He was a man in broad daylight, a clown at your kid's birthday party, a businessman shaking your hand, a predator who smiled and buried his victims in his own floor. Ted Bundy smiled, Richard Ramirez screamed, Gacy joked, but Jeffrey Dahmer, he whispered. And in that silence, he did things even the other monsters never dared. Born in 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Dahmer seemed like a quiet, lonely child. He was fascinated with animal bones, dissected roadkill, and collected skeletons as a teenager. By the time he was 18, he had committed his first murder. In 1978, he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. They drank beer at Dahmer's house. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer didn't let him. He bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, dismembered the body, and dissolved parts in acid. Then he waited. For over a decade, there were no other known murders, but the obsession never left. In 1987, Dahmer killed again and again. Between 1987 and 1991, he murdered 16 more men and boys. His victims were young, often black or Asian, and usually vulnerable, homeless, poor, or runaways. He'd lure them in with promises of money or modeling photos. Then he'd drug them, and when they were unconscious, he'd strangle them. But death wasn't the end. Dahmer kept the bodies, sometimes for hours, sometimes for weeks. He photographed them, posed them, had sex with the corpses, and eventually dismembered them. In his apartment, he kept human skulls on display, biceps and hearts in the fridge, severed heads in the freezer, barrels of acid to dissolve flesh. He experimented with creating zombies by injecting acid into victims' brains while they were still alive. He wanted companions who would never leave. Not lovers, objects. Neighbors complained about the smell, some even called the police, but Dahmer talked his way out every time. In July 1991, his final victim, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape. He ran down the street, handcuffed, and told police a man had tried to kill him. When officers entered Dahmer's apartment, they found Polaroids of dismembered bodies, a freezer full of human remains, and a human head in the fridge. It was over. Dahmer confessed in chilling detail. No remorse, just facts. In court, Dahmer admitted everything. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said, "I knew I was sick. I couldn't stop." He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, 957 years in prison. But he didn't live long. In 1994, another inmate beat him to death in a prison bathroom with a metal bar. His death sparked celebration in some circles, disgust in others. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't kill out of rage or lust or hate. He killed because he wanted something that couldn't leave, something that wouldn't scream, something that was his forever. In the end, he wasn't a monster in disguise. He was a monster in plain sight. Thank you for watching this episode of Black Tapes. If you found this story thought-provoking, consider subscribing. There's much more beneath the surface. Stay curious, stay cautious, and until next time, some tapes are best left unopened.